Hi, I'm Kelly, and today I'm going to talk about how to make fabric patches using pieces of recycled denim from old jeans and fabric scraps. And today we're going to talk about making abstract collage from the fabric scraps. Where stuff goes and maybe where it doesn't. I've only been hand sewing for a few months, a few weeks really, and it's already one of my favorite things to do. To take tiny bits of almost nothing and turn them into something. See, look at this. Teeny tiny little scraplets. But it's made this gorgeous patch. I'm mostly using mine for mending, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But you could also use these patches once you've got them made. I've already got a substantial pile. You could add them to a handbag or a backpack. You could give them away as gifts, sew them together and make little pouches. But, this is a journal arts channel, so if you'll join me in a few weeks, I'm definitely going to be talking about how to incorporate fabric patches like this into the covers of our journals. And indeed, maybe even make them into journal pages. That would be cute if you're making a bird journal. But as I say, I'm mainly using mine for mending. I love these Levi's so much. And that's not dirt. It only looks like it. These are my painting jeans. So it's got gesso, and that's glue, and some paint. And I don't want to let these go. But this hole has other ideas. So what I've been doing is using these patches to put over a hole like this. And now it is one of a kind. It's going to cover up that hole and reinforce the fabric around it so we can live to paint another day. Today's video is not about sewing per se. There will be some stitching. Mainly I'll be talking about composition, about what to do with your scraps to turn them into a piece. I started off wanting to mend my jeans by appliquing pieces over them, sewing over them. And when I first started, I was sewing the patch directly, the fabric scrap directly onto the jeans. And it looked good for about 20 whole minutes. Then I started, actually sitting down and bending down and doing stuff. And this happened. There's a hole. Okay, there's another hole. Originally, the seam was all the way over there. Same thing here. That didn't like it. That tore up. And I could see that sewing directly scraps onto the jeans themselves wasn't really going to work for me. So I decided to go back to the old blackboard. And when I say blackboard, I mean Pinterest. And there I found a world of people making patches out of fabric scraps, often rather abstract. I knew that I had found what I was looking for, where I was going to start working from. And that is because I may not know much about sewing, but darn if I don't know a lot about collage. And that's basically what this is. You can make patches out of any fabric that you got, but I knew that I wanted to work denim on denim, and that there was an old pair of very beat up jeans in my drying cupboard that weren't in my size. So I decided to make them into free art supplies. If you don't have a pair of old jeans, just go to a thrift store or charity shop, a yard sale or rummage sale, and see what you can find. Get the cheapest pair they have. You certainly don't want your vintage 1950s Levi's for this, just a cheap pair of jeans that you can cut up. And I made a lot of different sizes. This one's pretty big. And shapes. Here's a round one I'm going to work with. And I've also cut out quite a few mini patches, little baby ones. And in a future video, I'm going to talk about how to make really vibrant, abstract mini patches. So look out for that. As for fabric scraps, I did not have a lot. I did have some old bark cloth that I bought to use in a journal project, and there was plenty left over of these oversized flowers. I did also have a dress shirt. This was a Ralph Lauren dress shirt that I wore forever until finally a rip went right all the way downways vertically on the sleeve, and it could not be mended. So you know what I really did? The first thing I did was I tore it into ribbons and tea-dyed those. So that was cool, but I still had a ton left over. I also went to the thrift store and found this was an old pillowcase. That's going to be lush. So be sure you look at, doesn't have to be fabric. You can go to pillowcases, old clothing. You know what? Look at pajamas. If you can find cotton pajamas, they often come with whimsical designs. This was another dress shirt, and I did actually buy it at the thrift store to cut up because it's cotton. I like the indigo and the navy. One side has this subdued pattern. This other side had this same flowers, but they pop. There were stripes on the placket of the neck. And there's actually polka dots, little baby dots on the sleeve. So for about $3, I have a ton of different patterns of fabric. I did have also this. This is ribbon on a kind of a coarse weave cotton, similar to burlap. And I use this for wrapping parcels. But now I can use it for making patches too. So look around. If you don't have patches, you can start acquiring them easily, and that doesn't cost much. When you start cutting, sometimes you will be cutting to an organic shape, but most of mine I'm just making into whatever shape I need for what I'm working on. And as that doesn't work, as it gets trimmed, I end up having a lot of different bibs and bobs, different sizes. So cut it to order and then see what you've already got in your growing scrap bag. This one, if you're nervous about starting, I commend this to you because I just took whatever fabric I had and cut out a bunch of these 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter squares. It's actually it's actually really therapeutic just cutting these guys out. And then I made a grid, and I'm just going to feed these anywhere. I'm not going to think about it too much. There's not really a right or wrong way. And with all collage, you just got to let the pieces talk to you. Anyway, I'm going to sew these down by hand and come back and show you what we're going to do with it. I actually liked cutting these out so much that I got carried away. And that's good because now I have way more than I need and I can use these small squares. I have a ton of them now for filling up space in my bigger collage here. I'm just going to start messing with some of the patches to give you an idea of making this abstract piece. This is that semi-faux burlap. I actually like where it's raveling. You know, if you've seen my videos, how much I love working with gauze for messy texture. Well, to me, this is just a version of that. But if you don't like it, you can always tuck it under and make it tidy when you start to stitch. I'm going to leave mine like that. Mostly, I am working with squares and rectangles. It does give that patchwork look to it. There's no rules here. If there's one rule that one theory that I like is that I don't want mine to just match up on all the lines like that. I prefer mine to kind of intersect so that you've got some sort of asymmetrical space. I don't want it too matchy-matchy. That's a fancy way of saying I don't want it too matchy-matchy. Don't forget to go diagonal. Ooh, that's all. It's okay. Except it's taking up Mr. Rose there. Here's a little bit of that bark cloth. And see, again, rather than just make it perfect right here, I'm going to cross that line, and that's got a lot more interest and layer. Here's from some fabric remnant with spools. And I'm using both the fabric as a patch, and then I cut some of the spools out as elements, like that. Or that. Which would pick up that garnet color here. And that's it. That's as hard as the collage aspect goes. Just move your little scraps around and let them talk to you until you have a pattern that you think looks fun and you're good to go. It doesn't have to be quite that patchworky if you want to keep it more simple. I like how it looks when you layer shapes on shapes on shapes. There's a rectangle. Okay, it's a wonky rectangle, and another one, and another one. And from here, you could add another rectangular shape. And you could just go with that. And that's going to make a terrific patch. But what I did, I decided to go rectangle, 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 circle. You could do it on the other side with a more subdued. Nah. There's one of those spools. So that's very simple, and it would just look so adorable and do the job. And if you like, be sure and save even the tiny little script scraps. That's because in a few weeks, like I said, I'm going to look at making teeny tiny baby patches, and for that you can use even the smallest, most irregular piece of scrap. They do make a lot of themselves though. Before I start sewing, I want to pin these down. And I'm just not pinning the whole thing down. I'm getting it into place where it won't move too much. That's possibly wrong, but it's what's working for me. That's one of those things I'm making up as I go along. It's also going to let me, I'm going to sew this one first, and then I can lift up edges as I need to, as and when I need to hit those seams, like that. It also helps me reposition them as I start sewing, because sometimes a piece will, one of the scraps will move or buckle, and by just having it loosely pinned, then I can readjust as I go. You can also baste your scraps on, which is a way of saying you can sew super big, loosey stitches to hold things in place that you will then remove later. I'm too impatient and I can't be bothered. But I know a lot of people do it, so maybe I should. Next up, thread. I did not realize what a dilemma I had thread-wise until I started to get ready to sew, and I realized I ain't got none. Of course, that's not quite true. I bind books. So, of course, I have thread, but the thread I use for book binding is a special linen thread, and I'm in the middle of projects, so I didn't want to really use that up. I did find that I had embroidery floss. And here's the deal. You got to use what you got. And since all I had was embroidery thread to get started, I used it for a couple of patches. And it does, on the plus side, it is strong, it's inexpensive, and it's easy to find. Also, you can get it in tons of colors, which is going to give you a lot of contrast, even with just attaching it. But having made a few patches with the embroidery thread, it's not for me. If that's what you got, get started with it. But going into the future, I'm going to be trying this. And I found this quite by accident in a box of buttons that I bought. It's by DMC. It seems to be 10 gauge. It says 10G. And it's 100% cotton, so it's nice and strong. It's nice and thin. And I know from looking online that you can buy this in any color you can imagine. You get a lot. And I just love the way it's looking and feeling as I sew. So I'm going to be buying this going into the future. But use what you got. By all means, if you have a favorite thread, let us know in the comments so we can compare notes. From here, you can, of course, sew these on a machine. They're going to look good. One problem, I haven't got one. But if you do, have at it. I'm actually really enjoying sewing these by hand anyway. I listen to some music or some lessons or silence, and it's lovely. I only know 3 stitches. I think that's okay because I've been looking at some pictures very closely of professional work, and they pretty much just seem to use 2 or 3 stitches. So there. This is a top stitch. You go in, and then you just want to pick up a smidgen later. So you're sewing on the top. It's kind of like a running stitch too. So go in, and then just a little bop. Not a big bop, just a little one. And that's the stitch that I'm going to be using for some of these. Do not worry if your stitches are irregular, if some of them are long or if some of them don't match. Once they're on your patch, they're going to look great. It won't matter. I promise. The other stitch that I'm using that I'm going to show is called a whip stitch. And it's so easy. You're just going in and out, around and around, in and out. Okay, let's start here. I'm going to start at the back. And now I'm going, because there's a lot of raveling here, I'm going to go in about a good 1/2 inch. In on the top, in and around from the back. In on the top, in and around from the back. I'm going to say this again. Please do not worry if your stitches do not match. Sometimes that does matter. But in a project like this, it's messy, it's distressed, it's fun. And just let the stitches be where they want to be. I don't like to pull mine too tight. I have had problems with that. If you pull it too tight, like that, like this, okay, you don't want that. So just make them calm and loose, in and out and around. And those are the only 2 stitches that we're going to be working with on these patches. I'm not going to sew the whole thing on camera. I do want to point out before we go forward a couple of things that I'm finding in a practical way help me. Normally you would think that you're going to sew from bottom to top. And since this big fragment with the spools is on the bottom, especially if I was machine sewing, I would probably just do this guy, then add this one, and do all 4 sides as I go. But I'm not doing that. It's probably more sound, but I've actually made several patches just sewing the edges that you can see. In other words, I'm not going to go down and sew 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. I've been looking for that. I'm going to sew this where you can see it here, here, and here, and there. But otherwise, I'm going to let this top stitching on this covering piece tack that down. And that's working for me, just sewing the seams that you can see. I am finding that as one piece goes down, these float a little bit. So I'm going to stop from time to time, flatten it out, and make sure that everything is not buckling and is where I want it to be. Let's look a little bit more at that top stitch. I'm starting about 1/2 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch into the fabric. It may ravel a little bit, and that'll just be part of the distressed look. So longer stitch, and then longer stitch, longer stitch. I apologize if I go out of the camera from time to time. This is still kind of new for me. So it's going to stay in place. It's got the contrasting threads. I'm just going to go underneath. It's time to finish it and make a simple knot. Here is my patch, and here are the holes. And so the patch is going to cover up the holes and also reinforce this so I can wear them again. Which way? It looks fine. I like all of these. All of these look good. But I think I'm happiest with this, with the pink going out this way. Then maybe I can add some flowers down here. So, and again, you could always go ooh. That looks really good. You know, I think I'm going to do it like that. Okay, so I'm going to put my fingers here so I don't pin the jeans to the jeans. I'm just going to start pinning the patch into place. I'm not pinning it comprehensively. As I said, as we go around, we'll have to move it, so I'm just going to get a few key spots down. Two things. One is that because I'm going over a seam in the leg, I am not pulling it really tight. If I do that, I am going to basically make the jeans smaller. And trust me, I do not want that. So I'm going to make it nice and loose, covering that seam. So when I get to that part, I'm not scrunching the fabric up like that. Second, there's a pocket in there. And believe me, I found out the hard way a few times that you want to make sure that you don't pin your patch to your pocket. So that's probably the most fiddly part here, is not sewing your pockets to stuff. Now that's on, and I just love how it looks. I used that whip stitch, very simple, just going round and round and round the whole thing. Easy, easy. I actually, in this same leg of jeans, have another hole. Look at this. Yeah, I wore these a lot. So I think what I might do after this video is add this other patch asymmetrically like that. So we're going to have maybe like a patch on a patch. I like that. That is it for today's abstract collage style patches. Next week we are back to paper art, but in a few weeks, please join me because I'm going to do another video about making patches, this time with whimsical figurative images, about where to source them and what to do with them when you got them. If you like this channel and you would like to help support it, you can follow the link in the text box and go to Ko-fi and make a one-off donation or become a monthly member of this channel. If you have feedback, especially those of you who have more experience hand sewing, and have been wondering for the last 20 minutes, what was she thinking? Please let me know in the comments. Let us all know, and we can compare notes there and learn stuff. Until later, happy making.